Sarah didn't just find a mistake. She found the architect of her destruction. In the back of the house, tucked beneath a false bottom in an old cedar chest, she found the ledger. Evelyn had been terrified of losing control, and in her final months, she had kept meticulous notes of everything. She had listed the dates Mark visited, and more importantly, the dates he hadn't. She had noted down his frantic phone calls, the ones Sarah had once thought were about money troubles, but now understood were desperate pleas for loans to cover debts he refused to name. Sarah spent nights hunched over the kitchen table, the only light coming from a flickering lamp. She wasn't just a grieving daughter anymore. She was a detective. She traced the dates on the forged will against the bank statements she found in the attic. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Mark hadn't just forged the signature. He had pressured Evelyn when she was chemically incapacitated, a state Sarah had documented in her digital diary with precise timestamps and photographic evidence of Evelyn's physical state on those exact days. She realized then that Mr. Henderson, the lawyer with the parchment skin, hadn't just notarized a document. He had participated in a crime. Sarah reached out to a former colleague, a woman she'd worked with in corporate law before the 10 years of caregiving began. Clara, the colleague, didn't need to be convinced. She had seen Mark's type before. She looked at the evidence Sarah presented and didn't see a losing battle. She saw a slam-dunk case of elder abuse, fraud, and professional malpractice. "He thinks he's playing against a grieving girl," Clara said, her voice sharp as steel. "He's about to find out he's playing against a woman who has nothing left to lose." This was the pivot. Sarah stopped pleading with Mark. She stopped checking her phone for his texts. She began building a wall of documentation that would be impossible for any court to ignore.
Mark, meanwhile, was living in a state of arrogant euphoria. He had already put the house on the market. He was making grand plans, buying cars he couldn't afford, and bragging to his associates about the easy win he'd pulled off. He thought Sarah had simply faded away, beaten by the sheer weight of his indifference. But then, the legal papers arrived. They didn't come in the mail. They were served to him in the middle of a high-end restaurant, surrounded by the very people he had been trying to impress. The document was thick, a formal motion to invalidate the will on grounds of fraud, forgery, and undue influence. Mark called Mr. Henderson, his voice screaming. Henderson, however, was already busy drafting his own defense. He knew Sarah's lawyer, Clara, and he knew that once she had a hold of the thread, she would pull until the whole suit unraveled. If you've ever watched a narcissist realize the game is rigged against them, you know it's one of the most satisfying moments you can imagine. Hit the subscribe button to stay updated on how this story of betrayal unfolds. The best is yet to come. The day of the hearing was the longest day of Sarah's life. The courtroom was small, suffocatingly hot, and smelled of stale coffee and old wood. Mark arrived looking disheveled, the arrogance that had defined him for months replaced by a twitching, nervous energy. He kept checking his watch, as if he could fast forward through the reality he was about to face. When Clara stood up to speak, the courtroom went quiet. She didn't lead with anger. She led with the facts. She presented the digital diary, the timestamps of the photos showing Evelyn's state on the day the will was allegedly signed, and the testimony of the hospice nurse who had been on duty that day, a woman Mark had assumed he'd silenced with his threats. Then, the final blow. Sarah's lawyer played the recordings. They weren't just conversations. They were records of Mark's coercion. The audio was clear, crisp, and devastating.
You could hear Evelyn, barely able to form words, pleading with Mark to leave her alone. And you could hear Mark's voice, cold, transactional, and threatening, reminding her that Sarah wouldn't be able to pay for the facility if she didn't sign the paper. Mark tried to interrupt. He stood up, red-faced, and shouted that it was a fabrication, that the recordings were taken out of context. The judge didn't even look at him. He simply ordered the bailiff to sit him down, and then, slowly Meticulously, he read the record. The forgery was not just alleged, it was proven. The notary seal on the document had been officially revoked, and Henderson, the lawyer, was caught in a web of his own lies when questioned about the timeline of the signing. The judge didn't just void the will. He ordered an immediate investigation into elder abuse. The look on Mark's face wasn't anger anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fear. He realized in that moment that he hadn't just lost the money. He was going to lose his freedom. Sarah didn't stay to watch the bailiffs take Mark into custody. She didn't need to. She had fulfilled her duty. She walked out of the courtroom and into the cool air of the evening, feeling the weight of the last 10 years lift from her shoulders. The house was saved, but the trauma of it would linger. Sarah learned that the most profound acts of love often go unrecognized, and that family, at its worst, can be a cold, hollow shell. She had spent a decade being the anchor, and she realized for the first time that she didn't need anyone to hold on to anymore. Mark, however, found himself in a place he never dreamed he would be. The empire he had bragged about was a facade, built on credit and lies. He spent the next few years understanding the true meaning of the word consequences. They say that karma isn't a force that punishes you. It's the inevitable result of the path you chose to walk. Sarah walked a path of sacrifice, and she emerged with her dignity and her life. Mark walked a path of greed, and he discovered that the only thing at the end of a life built on betrayal is the sound of a door locking shut. If you believe that the truth always has a way of rising to the surface, hit the like button one more time.
These stories matter because they remind us that no matter how dark the tunnel, there's always a light at the end, if you're brave enough to keep walking. And for those who have lived through their own inheritance dramas, know this: you aren't alone. We'll be here next week with another story of justice served, so make sure you're subscribed.